G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about something really interesting that I'm finding clinically that I don't think many people are either aware of or understand completely. And that's basically the impact of low back dysfunction on hamstring function. And the purpose of this video is I want to basically present an argument that the majority of, if not all, hamstring dysfunction, whether that's hamstring tightness, hamstring cramping, all the way up to a hamstring tear or hamstring injury, should be considered a consequence of covert low back dysfunction. And it's really important to make this distinction because if we want to solve hamstring dysfunction, to make you someone who used to have a problematic hamstring or a tight hamstring, I don't believe we can do that without talking about the impact of your low back. Obviously, hamstring strength, hamstring flexibility, core strength, all this sort of stuff is really important to talk about in regards to improving hamstring function. But if we're not talking about the things that I want to talk about in this video, I think we're going to be missing the point, and it's going to be hard pressed to solve this dysfunction for people, which is the point. So before we get into these ideas, if you do find this information useful, please consider leaving a like on the video. If you do have some hamstring dysfunction, please let me know in the comments down below. Is it just constant hamstring tightness? Are you someone who's always felt like you've had tight hamstrings? Are you someone who cramps in your hamstrings? Are you someone who has a hamstring tear or recurring hamstring tears? Let me know, because I'd love to help out where I can. And obviously, if you find this information useful, even insightful or really helpful, please consider leaving a super thanks donation on the video. It's a great way to support me in the channel and just allows me to keep making these videos. So any of your help would be greatly appreciated. And obviously, if you're new, subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn potentially how to fix your issues and what the underlying cause of those issues are, hang around. Hopefully we'll get to that at some point. So with that being said, the way that I want to sort of structure this video is I want to talk about the three main features relating to the low back that I think are causing our hamstrings to be dysfunctional. And I'll go through a little bit of a bonus fourth one at the end, just because I want to hopefully tie all these concepts in together, because it's really important that I can explain the origin of all these things so that you can take this information and fix it. And so you can get to the point where you used to have that hamstring dysfunction. So what I want to talk about is we're going to go through the impact of core stability or poor core stability on hamstring function. We're going to talk about the impact of sciatic nerve neural tension on hamstring function. And then also we're going to talk about the role of low back joint dysfunction with maybe some muscular dysfunction thrown in there. And then to tie all that together, I'm going to talk about the impact of less than perfect spinal shapes. Call it posture if you will. It doesn't have to be sitting posture, but the impact of your daily spinal shapes on those three features, and then by extension, hamstring function. So if you're interested in those things, I'll bookmark them. They'll be linked below, but please watch through so you can get the context of everything that we need to go through. So I think the reason why I want to go through all this to begin with is when you go in to see someone with a specific issue, whether it's a tear or just tightness or cramping even, it's very easy for the industry to become very narrow focused, where we just become hyper focused on your hamstrings. We do all the hamstring tests, but then sometimes we neglect to take a step back and realize that that hamstring isn't a hamstring floating around in isolation on its own. It is literally, physically, anatomically connected to a whole range of other things and is governed by your spine. The nerves that come from your spine control your hamstrings. So there's a strong connection between that I think gets overlooked a lot if there is a very specific red flag or if you set up a flare in one area, it's hard to sort of take a step back and consider what's going on around that and what's caused that to happen. So that drives me to make these videos and videos like this, where I want to talk about the impact of relatively hidden features on that area, in particularly hamstrings, so that you can have all the information you need to hopefully solve that going forward. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the impact of core stability or reduced core stability on hamstring function. Now, what I need to make very clear here is core stability is a separate entity to core strength. So core strength is the buzz exercise of the buzz focus for a lot of spinal dysfunction, for good reason. Obviously, the stronger you are through your trunk, theoretically, the better that trunk should function. However, if you lack core stability or the conscious or unconscious ability to activate those muscles when needed, and if the timing's off or it doesn't activate properly at all, then you're not really gaining access to all that strength you've just worked so hard to achieve. For example, if you do sit and slouch, you could have the strongest core in the world. You could have, I think I read recently that the world record for a plank is about 9 hours now. You could have 9 hours worth of core strength, but if you're slouching, you're not actually using those muscles. You're resting on the passive structures. And we'll get to this in a second, but the important concept that we need to understand here is you need to have the conscious ability to activate your core stabilization muscles to create a stable platform for your hamstrings to function off of, and a lot of other things as well. And a great way to see this in real time is by doing a simple hamstring stretch. Now this works really well with a partner because they can really explore the depths of your hamstring flexibility. But what I'll get you to do is just with a basic hamstring test. If you have your hip bent up to 90 degrees, just so it's consistent, grab in behind the back of your thigh. If you just lift your leg as high as you feel comfortable, take note of what you feel. So for me, I feel a little bit of tightness at the back of the knee, a little bit of tightness at the back of the hamstring. Now what I want you to do is by drawing in that belly, by bracing your spine, by activating your core stabilization muscles, holding those in there, by repeating the same test again, and hopefully you can see this in the video, is you should feel like your leg actually goes straighter. So my shin hopefully goes further now than what it did, than when I'm not bracing anymore. I'm just relaxing, and it feels like the tightness comes in here. If I brace again and stabilize, it feels like I can go a little bit further in that moment. Now, obviously, I don't want you to take my word for this. I want you to test this out for yourself so you can hopefully see and feel the difference, so you can see the importance of this information. So the important thing is by improving the stability of your core muscles, the stability of your back, improving how that functions, you can take away the need for those hamstrings to be as tight. Now, obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time for your body to sort of reorientate in that way. And there's obviously some hamstring strength and hamstring mobility exercises that you can do to speed up that reduction in resistance there. But the important thing is that by improving the stability of your trunk, your hamstrings will function better and there'll be less restriction in that area. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle that I think gets missed a lot, because a lack of core stability or decreased core stability doesn't hurt. So we don't necessarily take the time to look for that unless there's a physical pain involved. So take a look at it yourself, have it tested out yourself if you can, and hopefully you'll see the importance of better core stability in improving hamstring function, decreasing the need for tightness and so on. So that's point number one. Point number two, as I said before, revolves around the sciatic nerve and neural tension. Now, the interesting thing is when we did this test before for me, and you may feel this yourself, is that when I do this, I feel an element of tightness down the back of my leg. Now, the reason why this is really important is one of the common misconceptions that I see a lot with hamstring tightness is that it shouldn't be at the back of your knee. So if you ever feel, or if your main limiting structure is at the back of the knee and that's tight, that's not actually hamstring tightness, it's sciatic nerve or an increase in neural tension. So the nerve itself doesn't get tight in the way that a muscle feels like it gets tight. We basically pull the slack out of that nerve so that it doesn't floss through that tissue in the way that it should. So one of the exercises that we can do to sort of counteract that is we can do a sciatic neural flossing exercise to shear some of that tissue free. Now, as a bit of a setup for this, we know that the sciatic nerve originates from the segments of your lower back. The nerve roots form into the sciatic nerve. They go through or just around that piriformis muscle, straight down the back of your leg, through the knee, and it branches off into different nerves. Now, it's important to understand that when we're doing a neural tension exercise or a nerve flossing exercise, again, which we've done before, we need to understand that we're not trying to stretch it, we're trying to move it and floss it through that tissue. So putting us back into this position, this same position again, what we'll do this time to increase that neural tension is I'll get you to bend your foot back. Now, you may not feel any difference in this position, but when we come up to full sort of knee extension, you should feel like there's a lot more tension going down through the back of the leg and potentially through that thigh. Now, what I'll get you to do from a neural tension perspective is, again, we don't want to hold it like we would a hamstring stretch. We want to consistently floss in and out of that position about 10 or 15 times. And what I'll get you to do is, if you take note of where your foot gets to on the roof, in my instance here, you should hopefully see that after about 10 or 15 or so, without moving your thigh, you should feel like your foot starts to go further and further back and your knee gets straighter and straighter. And then what happens is when we take that tension out of the foot again, so we don't bend the foot back anymore, you should then feel like your leg goes further straighter than it did previously. Now, if we combine that with core stability at the same time, we start to get a really powerful hamstring detensioner, I guess, over time. So by improving the stability at your trunk and decreasing the neural tension coming from that low back through that sciatic nerve, we can take away some of the factors that are asking that hamstring to remain tight, setting it up for potential injury down the track. It's number two. Number three is one that I think is probably the most important part of this whole conversation, and that's trying to find a way to reduce the amount of low back joint stiffness that you have in that area. Now, this is really important because we know that the nerve, the sciatic nerve in particular, originates from the base of that spine, and increased neural tension can be a consequence of some facet joint or some low back joint restriction with some potential muscle restriction over the top. And again, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you'll know where I'm going with this, but you can use a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball to hunt around your lower back for some of those restrictions, remove them, and then retest your hamstring flexibility again to hopefully see an immediate change. It may not be a huge change to begin with, but you deserve to see an incremental improvement from what you've just done. So same thing again. We want to lie back down again, same position, but what we're going to do with the ball, we're going to place the ball right in the middle where the spine is and just let it roll straight off to the side. So we're not going all the way out to the side here. We're just going to let it roll off to the side a little bit onto the spinal column where those joints are, and we're going to lie down on top of that. So basically what we can do is we're not rolling around. This isn't a rolling exercise. We want to be right next to your spine. We want to move the ball around until you feel like you hit something that feels a little bit tight or stiff. If you're not sure what that feels like, if you compare it to the other side, so while I was on this side, I've just moved it across to this side. My left-hand side feels like there's more restriction for the ball to push into. My right-hand side feels like the ball just sinks in a lot easier. So again, if you have all your hamstring dysfunction on your right-hand side, but you actually feel like your spine is stiffer on the left-hand side, follow that stiffness. Don't get caught up in left versus rights. Your body doesn't care enough about left versus rights in this instance. We just want your spine to function normally. So all we want to get you to do is just let the ball press in, stay here for 30 seconds, a little bit longer. Once you've done that, move it up a little bit further or down a little bit further, depending on where you feel you need to be. And then let that tissue give. Let it free up, let it mobilize. And then once you've done that, once you come back to this same test again, you'll hopefully feel like there's even more room to move, or the quality of that movement now for me feels a lot freer and a lot more supple. Now, you don't have to do this particular stretch if you don't want to. You can definitely do your regular hamstring stretches, whatever works for you. But the purpose of this is basically to highlight that by improving each of these three features, you should then start to feel like your hamstrings start to respond a lot more and don't feel as tight and stiff. And what I find personally, and what my patients tend to find, is if you have a really good go with the ball, maybe you spend half an hour or 45 minutes before going to bed just hunting around for those stiff areas, freeing them up, the next day you deserve to wake up feeling like there's a genuine change in how flexible your hamstrings feel. So again, if you're someone who's having persistent hamstring tears or you're cramping a lot, then potentially that low back is the hidden feature that's setting that tissue up for those dysfunctions. Now, to tie those three things in together, I want to relate this back to spinal postures and spinal positions. We can talk about sitting habits because they're often one of the most common things that we do throughout the day. But if you're not someone who sits a lot, then you can easily be excluded by that conversation. So we'll definitely talk about it in the context of sitting. But if you're someone who doesn't sit very often, we still care about the shape that your spine is in. So that can be someone who stands and leans over a lot. That can be someone who doesn't sit down at all throughout the day, but then goes to bed and is in that sort of long, sort of sitting, half lying position, putting your spine into a terrible shape. And the reason why this is so profound, I think, and is a really important feature to consider here in this conversation, is that if we're looking for a reason as to why those specific sections of your back that you found were stiff and once you release them, you hopefully felt an improvement in your hamstring function. There has to be a reason why that section of your back, that specific section of your back on that specific side of your back has become dysfunctional. And it's not bad luck in my experience. It's not genetics in most cases. It's basically a product of the shapes that you put your back into. So, for example, if you found that the section of your back right here, for want of just as an example, if this is the section that you found has the most stiffness, and when you free that up, it releases the most of your hamstring dysfunction, the reason why that would occur in my experience is that that's the position of your back that you are hinging through the most without realizing it. So if you're sitting in a chair, for example, working your way to a computer, it's very likely that you're creating an extra hinge in that part of your back, staying there for a predetermined, for a set period of time, all day, every day, weekly, monthly, whatever it is, and it's consistently asking that tissue to become stiff, tight, and dysfunctional just to cope with that shape. Now, if you do have one side that feels a little bit more dysfunctional than the other, most people tend to sit a little bit dysfunctionally, or asymmetrically, sorry. So if you're in front of the computer with your mouse, if that mouse hand drags you and twists you, essentially you're creating a hinge in your spine and then twisting a certain position to bias one side. If you're someone who sits and drives a certain way, if you sit into the couch a certain way and watch TV, there's always, or there should always be, a perfectly good explanation. So if those joints and soft tissues of your back are reacting to that, the nerve that comes from that area, or the nerve roots that come from that area that supply the sciatic nerve, can lose a lot of the slack in there. And then by being in that position consistently, you're not asking your core muscles to stabilize actively. You're resting on the passive tension or the passive strength of your ligaments and your bones and your muscles and your joints. So those three features, your core stability, neural tension, and joint dysfunction, can all come from a simple poor shape. And again, it can be sitting related for most people. If it's not sitting related, whether it's playing an instrument, sitting up in bed, bending over at work, whatever it is, we're looking for those consistently sustainable positions that you get into where your spine is biased in a way that it's just not tolerating over time. It may not be painful in any way because it may be buffering that really well. Your tissue quality may be robust enough to handle that until it can't, obviously. But if it's tolerating that, you don't have any overt pain or dysfunction in your low back that you notice day to day, but it's a different story when you go looking for it, then that can ask your hamstrings to become dysfunctional to compensate. So the main thing I want to get across in this video is that if you have any hamstring dysfunction at all, and you're not taking a look at your lower back and the positions that you're putting your lower back into, then you're potentially missing the biggest, almost the most crucial feature that might be causing that. So all the hamstring strength that you're going through, all the hamstring stretching that you're doing, all the massage that you're getting, all the fancy things that you're doing for that hamstring may ultimately be rendered useless because you're not fixing the reason or the thing that's asking those hamstrings to be dysfunctional in the first place. So obviously we want to do both. So again, this isn't a conversation about just working on the hamstring or just working on the back. Clearly, if you do both, at least in my experience and my patient's experience, you'll get there faster. So let me know in the comments what you thought about that and if that resonates with you. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there that feel like that hamstring dysfunction causes low back dysfunction. And I can definitely see how that can be a problem. But for me, I find that by getting rid of that low back dysfunction, the hamstrings don't have a reason to be dysfunctional anymore. So then they also don't have a reason to then play back into the lower back. So I think if we're looking for the first step, the chicken or the egg, the low back, based on the shapes that we're getting into, tends to sort of start this process that ends in the hamstring being dysfunctional. So as I said, if you found that useful, let me know. Please consider leaving a super thanks donation if you found this insightful at all. Let me know in the comments what sort of videos you might want me to do going forwards, because I really want to help as many people as possible solve their dysfunction. But I also want to use this channel as a platform to get at all the things that I'm finding clinically that I'm really passionate about exploring that I just don't think are out there at the moment. And hopefully the videos on the channel are a testament to the kinds of things that I'm finding, whether it's tennis elbow and the neck, glute dysfunction in the low back, costochondritis lower back, all these sorts of things that if they are discovered in the industry, we're just not putting it out there enough. So subscribe to the channel if you want to join me on this journey, and then we'll see you in the next one.